Alright, Xavier, let's take a look at your paper MLA format first. This is correct. This is correct. You got a space here that you don't need. Unique perception is the name of your paper. Oh, no, it's alright, I guess. I'm intrigued at how you actually use this as part of your theme, so we'll wait and see. Alright, so you start off with a quote, Xavier. You got punctuation problems here. No period there. You just keep it at the end. And then you say, in the play Macbeth, this specific quote resembles his struggle. Now, if I am reading this sentence correctly, the way you've worded it, I'm assuming you're meaning Shakespeare's struggle, because that's the only he you've recognized so far. So be very specific about whose struggle it is, as he confronts the murder of his friend Duncan. Now, you don't need a semicolon here. With literal bloody hands or something like that. So you have to reword this a little bit. This is going to be a common theme, Xavier. I think you got a lot of really oddly worded sentences that you probably just need to have somebody, whether it's me or somebody else, just walk you through these so that you can see which ones are off and which ones just need some work. This is when he's questioning who he is, comma, and why there's such, why there's such a sudden change in himself. So I like that idea of this is sort of the change in himself. So then you bring up the idea that he has post-traumatic stress disorder, which is fine. Now this is, I'm assuming, a website. Says that, and then you go on from here. You still need an in-text citation even after that. Even if you bring this up, you still need an in-text citation. You have some space issues here that you need to work on. So I'm assuming these are the main points that you're going to talk about. So he suffers from blah, 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 blah. No, this is not the proper use of semicolon because this is a fragment. So you can't have that on the other side of a semicolon. Doesn't only take away his personality, comma, it replaces it with a new person that has a greedy and society of power, and ultimately leading to his untimely demise. This is all plot, and this is just saying he dies. I like the idea that it takes away his personality, since you've kind of talked about the idea of changing in here, but I'd love to see a better thesis statement that talked about the concept of change and so on and so forth. So maybe work on that thesis statement a little bit more. So our first body paragraph is about guilt. This isn't a bad topic sentence. I'd love to see more specifically how it shifts his character. So maybe work on that. Making it hard for him to carry on his devious plan. He talks about, the noises appall him. I don't know if that really has to do with guilt. You don't have to keep saying his friend, Duncan. Just say Duncan or King Duncan or whatever. Sometimes he relive traumatic events. Does he do that? Because you bring it up, but have you talked about him reliving tragic events? You also need a citation for this source that you used. So everything is making him nervous. No wrong use of the semicolon from the bell ringing to the knocking on the door. No comma here. This would be the proper use of the semicolon. It all reminds him of that traumatic event. So this is separating two complete thoughts. Later on, I'll catch us up to him. Now, use the quote later on about being in blood stepped in so far. So we're still talking about guilt at this particular point. He says this after seeing Banquo, capital B, Banquo's ghost, which leads him to endless contemplation. What do you mean by that? Because I'm also not sure what you mean by this, as I would be hard pressed to find a quote where he questions everything that he's done so far after Act 3. You might be able to find a quote that kind of hints towards that, but I would be careful. Also, remember this is returning, whereas tedious is go over. But then you jump back into guilt. So I really don't feel like this is able to be explained. I don't see how this has to do anything with guilt. I don't know how this has to do anything with guilt. You got a space issue there. So I'm not sure these are all the best examples of guilt in the play. I mean, what about, you already used it, but this is one of the better examples of guilt. this is a sorry sight, or use his quote at the end of scene 2 of Act 2, where he says basically, "Wake Duncan with thy knocking, I wish thou couldst." So, I mean, that's guilt, but I don't see these as really good examples of guilt. So think about how you can alter and fix some of those. Alright, so your next one is about hallucinations, which, if you're like everyone else, you're going to bring up the daggers and Banquo's ghost, which you do, and we'll get to those in a second. So his mental illness proves more difficult, taking away his personality. Be specific with what's being taken away. No comma here. This is not a complete sentence. People receive things very differently with their senses while experiencing hallucinations. That doesn't really add much to it. I'd like to have a more specific quote about this symptom as it relates to Macbeth. Alright, so when he saw the dagger, this is a colon, since you're introducing a quote. No period here, since you used it here. As his typical behavior begins to wither away. What do you mean by that? So this is when he sees Banquo, so space issue here. But then you don't get to down here before you see it's Banquo's ghost. I don't know what this means as it continues to depart. As he consumes his whole personality away. What does that mean? So Xavier, see what I'm getting at? I tried to say this earlier. There's a lot of sentences that just are awkwardly worded, and I don't think you can prove in the story. So you might want to go back and look at some of those sentences and how you can rewrite them. Darker days arrive sooner, while anxiety as well as hallucinations and guilt overthrow his character. So the next one I'm going to guess is about anxiety in Macbeth. So let's look at that. Alright, so your last body paragraph is about anxiety. This is probably your best topic sentence too, by the way. And I'm going to talk about greediness here, because certainly greediness can apply to anything, but usually it's money. But is it greedy for power? Something like that. I don't know. Alright, so anxiety, like this is your definition from online, can cause unwanted and irrational thoughts. You still need a citation here. So if this is the case, most of this should be about unwanted or irrational thoughts. Going back real quick, here's your run. You got a run-on sentence here too, by the way. Comma splice. This is a complete sentence. Okay. So irrational thoughts, anxiety. Now you're talking about guilt. Okay. So that was a previous paragraph, and maybe this is guilt. So maybe this would have been a better second body paragraph, because then it would have went from guilt to anxiousness. He talks about Banquo in here. He states this as a result of the prophecies given to Banquo. But how does this have to do with being anxious? So he forms a plan to kill Banquo, comma, and it is later executed. How does that have to do with anxious? Because this explains how he's doing everything and anything to become king, but that doesn't have anything to do with being anxious. So how do these two things link together? How does this have anything to do with anxiousness? So now you're saying he's inheriting irrational thoughts, making him greedy. Again, be specific. Greedy for what? Greedy for killing, because the next example is killing his family. He sees it as a plot against him, but how is this anxiety? Therefore, in response to Macduff leaving, he plots to get rid of him. Now, you eventually get to trying to wrap in the thesis that it's how he's practically craving for power. But I still don't see how him being anxious is related to him craving for power. I think there needs to be a stronger connection there, Xavier. You mentioned this for the second time in this body paragraph. You probably don't need to mention that again. This is a really weak last sentence, so I'm hoping you're going to fix that too. Alright, so there's your greediness for power, which was part of your thesis statement. You just got to be specific in your body. Not improper use of a semicolon there. It evolves, creating a barbarous character building to his ineluctable termination. Ooh, big word there. While suffering from PTSD. It's a little wordy here, this thesis statement here. You even use the word heedful, huh? So someone's been using the thesaurus, I think. alters himself, comma, 2. Actually, this would be no semicolon. This would be 2 commas here. Don't use the word very. People know the real Macbeth and are questioning his decisions, which makes him greedy. Not improper use of a semicolon. What does this have to do with the story? So it says he would have had a far better outcome. How? And that seems like something you'd want to address in the body paragraph too. Sometimes patience is a key, which you haven't really brought up this concept in there. No comma there. And not having it can ultimately lead to one's own destruction. And I guess it's an okay ending. So get rid of this. You only want that part there. Remember, every line after the first gets indented over, so you want to fix that as well. Alright, Xavier, you got some good stuff in here, but we definitely need a little bit more work, so looking forward to another draft.